Check. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Royal We Fellowship. Shabbat Shalom. Happy Saturday. Blessings to you. We are going to continue in our story of Joseph, also his father Jacob, Israel, and we have a lot of insight to look into in today's message. I want to thank those of you who are here with me and who are here every Saturday for Royal We Fellowship. We're growing together, learning together. And for those of you who are new to Royal We Fellowship, thank you for joining as well. Before we get started, if you would like to be a supporting partner with Royal We Fellowship, you can do so by offering support in the link down below. It's not required. Rather, if you are inspired to help, you can go ahead and do so. I'm anxious to get started with you. I don't see anything in the chats today. It's doing that thing again where it's not showing me my chats, but that's okay. I'm going to continue on anyhow. I don't know who is signed in and who is not. It's not visible to me. But that's okay. We're going to go ahead. There it is. Finally. All right. Well, let's go ahead and open up in prayer before we get into today's message, which, by the way, we are in Genesis chapter 46 today. It looks like looks like we may be having an error. I'm not sure. We're going to continue on. Hopefully you all are able to see everything okay. All right. Let's go ahead and get started before anything else happens, all right? Let's open up in prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, how holy is your name? And your kingdom will come, and your will shall be done here on this earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day and each and every day our daily bread, and forgive us of our sins as we forgive others who have sinned against us. Lead us not into temptation, Lord, and deliver us from the evil that's in this world, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. And everybody says, amen. Yes, I did shave. Oh, no. Mary says, oh, no, you shaved. I did shave. It's hi from Sri Lanka. It's good to see you, Marina. You know, it's summertime, and I don't do well big old thick beard in the summertime. So I wanted to shave and just be clean shaven. So it's just going to take a while for you to get used to it, but I assure you, you will get used to it. It will be okay. All right, so Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Enough about the naked chin and the naked face here. Let's get into the message. We are in Genesis, but why? But why? But why did I shave? Because it's hot. Beards are hot. You try growing a beard. They get hot, and yeah, I don't know. It's different. Just something different. Just something different. All right, let's get into baldness all over. Yes, baldness all over, except right here. And I got some eyebrows too. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Enough about the shavenness. My goodness. Everybody gets so like, wow, you shaved. Oh, man. Yeah, I did. So you'll get used to it, I promise. There was a day when I did not have beards. So this summer, I'll probably not have a beard. So we are in Genesis chapter 46 today. And we're going to switch gears because we have been following primarily the life of Joseph. Joseph was... as we've talked about, he was rejected by his brothers, ended up in Egypt, and now is the second most powerful person in all of Egypt, right under Pharaoh. And we are at this point now where Joseph's brothers had to go to Egypt in order to stay alive, and they had to deal with Joseph. So the very brothers that rejected Joseph are now under Joseph's authority. Joseph is the authority over whether or not his brothers even eat. Now, how many of you would dream about being in the position where narcissistic people who have rejected you and who have purposefully tried to get rid of you, possibly even hurt you and kill you, you're now an authority over whether or not they live, right? That it's kind of like, wow, that's pretty crazy. thing to think about, right? But yet, this is where we see Joseph. Now, I want to remind you of something, though, before Joseph is even in this place. At least 14 years has passed since Joseph has even seen his brothers. 14 years, and Joseph himself has been in and out of Egyptian prison. He's been falsely accused of a sexual encounter with Potiphar's wife. So not only was Joseph rejected from his brothers, but he's also had other experiences, which by now in his life, he's under this understanding that you and I need to be understanding of too, and that is, in this world of humanity where we deal with humans, we are going to deal with the nastiness that human nature has to offer. Joseph, as well as you and myself, we've experienced all of it. Not only was Joseph rejected by his brothers, and so he experienced that first bit of narcissistic abuse with his family, but then he ran into this woman who falsely accused him, had him thrown in prison, so he experienced the narcissistic abuse there. Joseph has had plenty of time to realize, wow, this world sucks. People suck. Narcissism is everywhere. People in this world are not inherently good. And this is the problem with modern Christianity, because if we're not careful, we are led astray down this path that leads us to believe that people are inherently good. Life is rosy if you just live a Christ-like life, then and you give and you love other people, then they will love you back and everything will be good. But if we look at the ancient text, if we look at the Old Testament, we see that's the farthest thing from the truth. Even when Jesus was here, we see that that's the farthest thing from the truth. I believe that the message of Christ, which we are not there yet, we're still in the Old Testament, but by the time we get to Jesus, what we're going to discover is that the crucifixion was a display not only of God's love and sacrifice for his people, but it was also a display of the evil of the world that we live in. It was a full-on display of the nature of humanity, of those who wanted to spit on him and punch him in the face and call him names. For what reason? Let's be reminded of what the reason was, that the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Romans and the Greeks even, and all the community was laughing and punching Jesus. The reason was because he was doing great things. He was doing things differently than what society thought he should do, but nevertheless, he was doing good things. He was growing in popularity for doing good things. And as we still see in this day and age, this brings out a lot of hatred and animosity from narcissism, from the narcissistic humanity. The same narcissistic humanity that you have dealt with, that I have dealt with in our own families. Okay. So by this point in time, Joseph has reconnected with his brothers, again, 14 years after the situation. This is important to understand because many of us think that we can go and deal with narcissistic people and we've been out of the relationship for 2, 3, 5 years. We can't. All right. It's not going to work that way. Not only was Joseph 14 years out of the situation, 14 plus years, but he was in a position of authority. He had a brand new life, brand new wife. He had his own children. He was an Egyptian. He no longer needed anything from his brothers, so he dealt with them differently, right? This is another important thing to understand. But we're going to switch gears from Joseph. And today what we're going to talk about in chapter 46, we're going to jump back to Joseph's father, Jacob, also known as Israel. Jacob wrestled with God. God changed his name to Israel. Now, before we get into this, I want to remind you that Abraham, Isaac, right, starts with Abraham. This is where God pulled Abraham away from his family, away from his hometown, and to become a pilgrim, to become a sojourner, to become basically homeless following God. Abraham started that journey, and then also his son Isaac, and then also Isaac's son Jacob, right? And so Jacob is continuing on this. And so when we look at this, what we're seeing here is a family of people who are living as individuals, independent, sovereign, independent people who have pulled away from their families. I guess you can say that these are the black sheep of their families, beginning with Abraham. Abraham struggled to assimilate with his family. God called him out and said, "Go where I will show you." And he went. Same thing with Abraham's son, Isaac. Isaac then became unable to assimilate. He was then off and independent on his own. And then Jacob, as you know, the story most recently, he was unable to assimilate with his brother Esau. And so he was forced out as the black sheep. And so if you see, the interesting aspect of this is that God seems to be using the black sheep of the family, the ones who don't assimilate into the group, the culture, the family dynamic. He chooses them to push his line, to continue going. Now, it can be kind of scary because you feel homeless. You don't know where you belong. And we're going to see this continued, and this is in today's chapter 46. So we're getting at this place where Jacob goes to Egypt to see about his son Joseph, right? Joseph's brothers ran back to Jacob, back to Israel, and said, guess what? Joseph is alive. He gave us food, and he's inviting us all to Egypt. Chapter 46. So Israel, Jacob, set out with all that was his. And when he reached Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. Now, this is an important aspect. We're at Beersheba, and Jacob is offering sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. This is an important landmark to Israel, still is to this day, because of his father Isaac, but also because of Abraham, right? So this place, Beersheba, happens to be this place of these wells, and these wells begin with Abraham. And it begins back in chapter 21, where we talked about this, where Abraham was also a pilgrim, where he was the black sheep of his family, and he left. And as a wanderer, as a homeless person, came upon this place where he found water, these wells, and in the area there was a king, King Abimelech, okay? And if you remember, Abraham was lying to Abimelech about his wife, right? And all kinds of weird things transpired there. But nonetheless, they made an agreement at these wells of water between Abraham and Abimelech. And so they called it the Well of Oath. And it still is called Wells of Oath to this day. And it's important to understand that they kept going back to this place, right? So you can find that in Genesis chapter 21. But then also in Genesis chapter 26, we see the same King Abimelech also dealt with Abraham's son Isaac at that very same well, right? So when Isaac also lied to King Abimelech about his wife, and here's the issue: both Isaac and his father Abraham had a different understanding of the world, the same understanding that you and I have. This is another aspect that you can use to compare yourself as an independent person, as the black sheep, as the one who doesn't like to assimilate. There's scary understandings about the world we live in. There's some ways in which God has given you an ability to see the world that's kind of terrifying, kind of truthful, but at the same time, kind of accurate. And this is the reality, that the world is not a safe place, that it's a dangerous place. So if we look at Abraham and Isaac, one of the things they shared in common was they lied about their wives. What did they say? They went to these places where King Abimelech is and these other people, and instead of acknowledging their wife, they said, it's my sister. Both of them were caught in this lie. And they were caught in it, by the way. God made sure they were exposed with their lies. However, it's important to understand why they felt the need to lie. The reason they felt the need to lie is because exactly what they say. I was afraid that if you knew it was my wife, if the men in your area knew it was my wife, you would kill me and take my wife because she's beautiful. Now, where would they get this idea from? It's an interesting question. And again, these are godly men. These are men that God had chosen to separate from their families and to venture out. So there's a lot of things at play here. One, they had a significantly different view of the world, much like you and much like me. Once we experience narcissistic abuse, we see the world differently. You understand the potential for evil, hostility, and aggressiveness, even for stupid reasons, such as saying, well, this is my wife, and the possibility of somebody saying, well, your wife is beautiful, I'll kill you and take her. And a lot of people say, that's far-fetched, that would never happen, but it can happen all the time, and it does happen all the time. We do see instances, even in today's news, where affairs take place, and then there's possible hostile, aggressive things that transpire. I think in today's world that we live in, because there's laws, there's a presence of authority through police and things like that, it's less likely because people don't want to go to prison. People don't want to get in trouble. So in reality, the world that we live in, people are more afraid of getting in trouble than anything else. It does not mean that in their hearts they would not do something hostile out of their own selfishness. Okay? This is what we need to understand about the world we live in. Keep in mind that in this place, in this time, in the book of Genesis, there was no police. There was no governing authorities. It was individuals moving along in the land, and absolutely, if one guy had a good-looking wife, then the other one wanted it, then they would probably duel each other to the death to see who gets the woman. They had no respect for things such as marriage. And by the way, it seems like we're getting into that area again in these days. I believe marriage is under attack, all kinds of things. There's less of a respect for these things, okay? So that's the world that we lived in. So this is why they lied. They were trying to, in a way, through their understanding of the evil that's in this world, they were trying to preserve themselves and preserve their lives. Now, they didn't get away with it. Their lie was found out, but it's important to understand that. But now at this well, okay, now that we've had that side note, at this well where Jacob is now returning to, it's the well of Beersheba. So Jacob is going to Egypt, and now this is a significant place that a reason rather that he stops at this well before going into Egypt. Okay, we see that the well was named Beersheba twice. It was given its name twice, once by Abraham and then again by Isaac, because it seemed to be this place where they were met with a hostile situation in a narcissistic world, and then it was diffused, and they were able to diffuse it, and they believed that God spared them, and so they sacrificed at that well, and they prayed at that well 2 times, and so it was named Beersheba, and like I said, it's still Beersheba to this day. Okay, it received its name twice. So according to even Wikipedia, Abraham's dealings with Abimelech, and again from Isaac, who chose his own covenant with Abimelech as well, of Gerar, and whose servants also dug wells there. So in Genesis, this is a significant place, and it is still to this day. Now that Jacob, he's heard that his son Joseph is alive and well in Egypt. His brothers went and said, guess what? Joseph is alive in Egypt. He has food. We're all starving because of this famine. Let's all go to Egypt. The Pharaoh has invited us now to live in Egypt with Joseph. Jacob is probably very cautious about this. I don't think he wants to go to Egypt. And the reason is because prior to this, Jacob's father Isaac was warned not to go to Egypt. We see this in chapter 26, Genesis chapter 26. There was a famine, an earlier famine in the land, besides the previous famine in Abraham's time. And Abraham and Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. The Lord appeared to Isaac and said, do not go down to Egypt. Whatever you do, don't go to Egypt. Live in the land where I will tell you to live. Stay in the land a while, and I will be with you and will bless you. That's in chapter 26. And so we see that they lived under this, that was Isaac. Okay, and Isaac obviously shared this with his family, with his son, Jacob and Esau. The warning was this: don't ever go to Egypt. Egypt at that time was the mega. It was the it was the big place. It was the place to be. It was the place of sin and debauchery. It was known. It was the world power at that time, Egypt. Okay, and they were warned not to go down there. Why? If you go down there, you're probably just going to be nothing but a slave. You're going to be nothing but they'll take advantage of you. You won't be blessed by God if you go to Egypt. This was the idea. So Jacob had a fear because of his father Isaac, because of that warning of God, don't go to Egypt. Jacob had a fear of going to Egypt. We see in chapter 26. And so for Jacob to hear, or Israel, to hear that his son Joseph was second in command in Egypt, the son that he thought died, the son that he thought was no more, for him to hear now, well, guess what? He's in Egypt. And Pharaoh wants us to come down and we're going to be blessed, Would Jacob be scared? Absolutely. Would he want to go? Would Israel want to go to Egypt? No. It's like going to the very place that God told them not to go and be a part of. When God had made them a promise and they're believing in a promise that God is going to make them a great nation, it makes no sense. Why would I go to Egypt? Egypt is already a nation. Egypt is not only a nation, but it's known as the debauchery armpit of the world. Why, Lord, would you send me? Why would you send me there? It doesn't make any sense. And so we find this place now where Jacob finds himself again at the well of Beersheba, the wells. And this is where Jacob now is making, where God meets Jacob at this well. In verse 3 of chapter 46, we see it says right here, Jacob, here I am, he replied. I am the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. So now it's changing. I'll make you a great nation in Egypt. I'll make you a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again. And Joseph's own hand will close your eyes. So the promise there is of God at the place of the wells, the place where the oath has been made with Abraham, Isaac. It's now being instilled in Jacob to break that fear that was once instilled in his prior fathers. Probably confusing. Go ahead and go to Egypt. Now I'm going to make you a great nation there. I've got something different. God is saying, I've got something different going on. You don't have to be afraid of Egypt. Now go. There's something there. Now we're moving on, if I can find my place. So we get to where Jacob now left Beersheba, okay, left the place of the wells. And before we get there, I just want to read something to you. I discovered this as well. This is from John Chrysostom, and he offers, as far as Jacob having this moment at this well before going to Egypt. And this is what he has to say. John Chrysostom says, on hearing this, let us learn, and this is important for you and for me, let us learn in whatever we do, whether embarking on some project or beginning a journey, first of all, to offer sacrifice to the Lord in prayer, and by calling on his help to address the matter in hand. Thus, also imitate these good people's godliness. He continues, he offered a sacrifice to the God of his father Isaac, the text says, for you to learn that Jacob followed in his father's footsteps and thus demonstrated by the reverence for divine things that Isaac had, because he took the initiative in showing his own right attitude and thanksgiving. So the main part of what is being said here is that even when you're doing something, it doesn't make sense, right? When you feel led, again, as an independent, sovereign individual, even if it seems like you're going to a place where you're just not sure of, we need to remember to take that time, embarking on a new journey. Sometimes it's leaving a toxic relationship. Sometimes it's moving from one state to another. And I titled this message, The Purge. And the reason is because the reason Jacob and Israel is going to Egypt is because of a purge, because of a famine, because everything is falling apart where he is. They're starving. And so now he really has no choice. And so he's meeting with God saying, I have no choice. There's nothing here. We're going to die of this famine. I don't want to go to Egypt because I was told not to go to Egypt. But if you want me to go to Egypt, Lord, then I will go to Egypt. All right. Many of us experience this place in our lives where we're being purged. Everything in our life is suggesting that we need to move. Our relationships are falling apart. We may be struggling financially. We may not be able to afford where we're living. And so there's a purge taking place. Sometimes it happens all at once, and we need to be able to stop for a moment and pray and say, Lord, okay, if you want me to go, I'll go. I'm scared. I'm terrified. And allow the Lord to say, don't worry, I'm going before you. And I can speak from experience to this because for most of you who know the story of the Royal We and how it started, I was born and raised in California, hit this place where I was experiencing the narcissism and the brokenness of family dynamics and relationships. At the same time, There was all kinds of financial issues. Everything seemed to be falling apart where I was in California. And the idea and came to me through through people in church, friends, maybe you've got to get out of here. There was a purge. Often when I look back at leaving California, it was more like a purge. There was no reason to stay where we were. Coming to St. Louis, Missouri was never really a thought beforehand until it came to this one moment just 5 years ago. 5 years ago now, right? Get up, take your family, go to St. Louis, Missouri. We have nothing. I don't know what's going to happen. Don't worry. It's going to work out. And sure enough, because of the purging, coming to St. Louis, Missouri, things have opened up. God had come before, opened up what was about to transpire, what was about to take place. A kid born and raised in California, now living in St. Louis, Missouri, in the Midwest, and the royal we is born. And so, we spent a lot of time also in prayer before coming to St. Louis, right? And so this is important to understand. So Jacob is doing the same thing. He doesn't quite know about going to Egypt, doesn't know about quite that move, but he spends time in prayer beforehand. And the wells are significant. It's a significant place. It seems like sometimes people wander back and forth in circles around the same place. And these wells in Beersheba seem to be that one common place that they go back to. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they're going in circles between Egypt and these other lands, and they come across these wells. It's so interesting how things go in a circular pattern at times. And now, so through the rest of this chapter, we go through all the names of the sons in chapter 46, all the names of the sons and the gigantic family that Jacob takes with him into Egypt. All in all, it gets to where there are 70. There are 70 members, direct members of the family, direct offspring of Jacob and his sons, equal 70. So there's a lot. It's a big family, and we get all the names of them. So we'll skip all the names. You can read the names for yourself if you want to know all their names. And now, down in verse 28, chapter 46, says that Jacob sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to get directions to Goshen. When they arrived in the region of Goshen, Joseph had his chariot made ready and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel, Jacob. They're going to meet again for the first time. Again, Israel, Jacob, had believed that Joseph was dead for all of these years. So Joseph and his chariot were ready, and as soon as Joseph appeared before Israel, Jacob recognized his son, even as a grown man, recognized him. And it says in verse 29, he threw his arms around his father and he wept for a long time. Joseph wept. He threw his arms around his father and just wept for a long time. Israel, Jacob said to Joseph, "Now I am ready to die. I am ready to die. Since I have seen for myself that you are still alive," Israel said, "I can die. This is the greatest moment of my life." Right? And it's interesting to see this, and this is something that you and I can gather as well. Life is not always about who we become and what we are necessarily known for. And I believe that Israel, Jacob, is an indication of this. He had this realization in verse 30. When Israel told his son Joseph, "Now I'm ready to die, since I've seen for myself that you are still alive. Not only are you alive, but you're the second in command of Egypt." There's a lot wrapped up in the statement in verse 30. Israel saying to Joseph, "Now I'm ready to die." You see, when we look at the life of Abraham, of Isaac, and now of Jacob, each one of them was given a promise from God. Do as I say, follow where I tell you to go, and I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars. I will make this amazing thing happen. What's interesting is that all of these people were wealthy in their own right, yet they never quite saw the final result of what God was saying. How many of you feel as though God has spoken some greatness into your life, and you have this idea and this vision of what this is going to look like? You're going to be surrounded with the never-ending stars of your offspring or whatever. It's a huge promise, or whatever the promise is. Maybe God said he's going to bless you and you're going to be something great, but you don't quite ever get there. And I believe that story is true for Abraham, for Isaac, and for Jacob, because when we look at this text, when we see their story from beginning to where we are now, we see them wandering back and forth, all of them, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, going back and forth, having to protect their lives, moving from altercation to altercation in a very narcissistic world, being homeless. They were all sojourners. They were all wanderers. They all were failures at assimilating into any group or kingdom or society in the world. They just did not fit in, except for with their own people, with their own children. They just didn't fit in, and they were constantly on the move, wondering, when is God going to come through with this promise? When is God going to come through? And I believe that Jacob is no exception to this. Jacob really struggled. Israel really struggled with all of this. He didn't know who he was in the beginning. He was so torn and tormented from this confusion. God, I don't fit in with my family. I'm not like my brother Esau. Who am I? And he wrestled with God all night. Many of us wrestle with God in the same way. Who am I? What is going on? I can't stand this. I don't know who I am. I don't like myself. And you can imagine Jacob wrestling with God and wrestling all night until finally the Lord broke his hip and changed his name and said, your name is now Israel, because you've wrestled with God. You've wrestled with this understanding that the world is a nasty place. It's narcissistic. It's corrupt. It is evil. It is wicked. And you and your descendants are going to bounce around to stay independent and sovereign of the world. And this is probably the most profound message that you and I can take from this. If you feel like you don't belong in any group in this world, it's for a reason. It's because you belong to God, and because God is leading you through this world. Listen, the Bible is not a story of how to get along with the world. The Bible is a story of God navigating people through the nastiness and narcissism of the world. The Bible from the ancient days of Abraham is a story of being led away and around and avoiding the painful reality that we don't want to face, which is the world is narcissistic and evil. It's not a good place. We live in a very hostile place, something that most Christian teachers don't want to talk about. Focus so much on the love and go and find the love in other people and scratch at them until you find their love. That's not what we see. It's not what we see since day one. It's not what we see since Cain killed his own brother Abel. We see two very opposing sides in this world and people. We see evil intentions. We see maliciousness. We see malignancy. We see hostility. And there's so many names being applied to evilness and maliciousness and hostility. And in this day and age, it's all attributed to mental health and mental health awareness and this and that. But evil is evil. Maliciousness and hostility is maliciousness and hostility. If a person can kill another person, it doesn't matter what mental health you assign that to, it is evil. It matters not. So what we see from the ancient days is people that God has chosen, like you, like me, to not fit in with this and to navigate and to work and to be wanderers. And so they've lived their lives as wanderers up to this point. Jacob himself, Israel himself, never fully saw what God was talking about. None of them did. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all on this promise that God was going to bless them, never quite saw what God was referring to. Never quite saw their descendants become a nation, because they're not a nation yet. And now Jacob is in Egypt. Egypt is already a nation. And it's probably confusing to Jacob, saying, what are we doing here? I thought, God, you thought you were going to make us a nation, but now I'm going to Egypt. We're going to become Egyptians? That makes no sense. This is the worst of the worst people. But I believe at this moment in verse 30, when Jacob saw his son Joseph, it changed in that moment. It says, now I'm ready to die, since I have seen for my eyes that you are still alive. And I believe there's more to that. It's not just that he's alive, but also that he is second command in Egypt. He's saying, I can die now. I get it. A lot of God's plans it's making more sense. It made no sense before coming to Egypt when God made promises that he's going to make us a great nation. But now that I see you, my son, second in command under Pharaoh of Egypt, I see something taking place. It doesn't look the way I thought it would look. And how many of you know that God's ways are not your ways or my way? We believe that when God has a promise on our life, we're going to see the exact fruit of that promise. I believe now in my journey, and I hope to instill this in you, that you and I may see a fraction or a part of God's promise in your life, but don't think that that small fraction and part will not go to your descendants and grow into something bigger, and then from their descendants into something bigger. So sometimes we need to look outside of ourselves. I know a lot of us are waiting for God's promises, but if we do that, we'll avoid what God is giving us with, is providing us with, which is our own wealth and our own right? So we can stop and be thankful for what God has given us while holding on to the hopes that God is going to do something great. If we don't see it, it will be with our descendants. Sometimes we want to see all of it, right? No, God, it was my promise, right? How many of you? It was my promise, God. You gave it to me. I was going to be the wealthy one. I was going to be the big one. Lord, why am I growing and growing and I'm not receiving anything? But you are, right? And so this is important, probably the most important part of this message. So Israel said to Joseph, now I'm ready to die. I remember God's promises in my life that we would become a nation. I didn't see it happen in my life, but I see you, Joseph, and I see you in Egypt. I'm ready to die, and I'll be okay. I get it. I get it. Something bigger is happening. There's a reason we're all in Egypt. I get it. Verse 31, then Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up to speak in Pharaoh and will say to him, my brothers, my father's household are here. They're living in Canaan. Who were living in Canaan, they've now come to me. The men are shepherds. They tend livestock, and they will have brought along their flocks and their herds and everything they own. And Joseph, being smart, says, when Pharaoh calls and asks, what's your occupation? You should answer, your servants have tended livestock from our boyhood on, just as our fathers did. Then you will be allowed to settle in the region of Goshen, for all shepherds are detestable to Egyptians. So basically saying, in this area of Egypt where I am, shepherds are looked down on, okay? So I want you to tell them that you're shepherds so that you go to Goshen, which is the further outskirts of Egypt where they're not going to bother you. Joseph is protecting his family from the Egyptians. Joseph knows enough about Egypt, and he knows enough about the politics of Egypt. It would kind of be the same as somebody telling you, when I moved, give you an example, when I moved from California to Missouri, to the Midwest, I knew nothing about St. Louis. Thankfully, I do have cousins out here. And the cousins, when I was looking for a place to land in St. Louis, and I was looking at all the different places that in St. Louis and Missouri is split up. There's North St. Louis, there's South St. Louis, there's East St. Louis, and it's easy to look at some of the cheaper places and say, okay, well, I found these places in North St. Louis. But thankfully, I had cousins out here who would say, no, I wouldn't put you there, right? I wouldn't put you there in that area because it might not be the best suit for you being a new place, right, in St. Louis. And so this is an important concept to understand. So Joseph, knowing all of Egypt now, said, okay, this is what you're going to say to Pharaoh. We want to put you in Goshen, all right, this city in Egypt. We want to put you in Goshen. Tell the Pharaoh that you're shepherds. This is where you're going to go. We want to keep you away from this area of Egypt. We want to keep you away from that area of Egypt, right? We want to keep you away from East Egypt, downtown South Egypt. We want to keep you away from there. We want to put you up in Goshen, all right? You'll be safer there. And so this is where they're able to grow now in Egypt. This is, I believe, why God had orchestrated this whole thing. It took for Joseph to become second in command of Egypt so that somebody could not only understand Egypt better, which was the world power at the time, know the politics of it, but now usher in Israel into the overarching umbrella protection of Egypt, yet keeping them outside of the politics of Egypt. So again, Israel started out, God led Israel to a place in Egypt where they can grow and expand because of the resources, yet be separated from the politics of the area. And this is important to understand. Sometimes if we need to go to a place that we're not familiar with and scary, we trust and believe that we'll go to the right place where we'll be far enough away from the politics and the sides and some of the weird stuff of an area, right, of natives, and grow and blossom while still under that the resource protection, but able to grow and flourish. All right. So with that, I want to thank you all. That wraps up this message, and we will continue on next week with our further story of Joseph and Jacob and Israel now growing in and throughout Egypt, right? As God has led Israel and his family and descendants into Egypt. And then obviously later on down the road, they are all taken out of Egypt through Moses. So we will see Israel's growth and expansion in Egypt. And then we will also see when Israel is pulled back out of Egypt, and we'll get there. With that, I want to thank all of you for being here, being a part of Royal We Fellowship. Shabbat Shalom. Have a very blessed weekend. And let's go ahead and pray out. Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for Royal We Fellowship, and I pray for your blessing on each and every buddy here today, that they would have a blessed week and a blessed week ahead. And I pray that the message today, that your word would speak into their hearts and into their situation, and that you would help and provide a way when we don't see a way, and when we feel confused in life, when we're not sure where we're going or what we're doing, why we are independent, why we are sovereign in this situation, why we are wanderers in this situation, why we fail to assimilate in the groups. I pray that your word and your message would sink deep into our hearts with purpose and with your leading us, Father God. We ask this in Jesus' name, and everybody says, amen. All right, Shabbat Shalom. Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll be back next Saturday morning at 9 o'clock a.m. right here on Royal We Fellowship. And I will still be shaven, by the way. I'm going to enjoy having a naked